Hello, Dawg Nation. Happy Easter weekend. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are so happy to have you with this busy show for us, reacting to a lot of what is going on here, including some big-time recruiting stuff with Jeff Sentell. He stops by and sees us on a Friday. Sounds like there was a little bit of movement with Georgia practice last night, moving a scrimmage supposed to be on Saturday up to Thursday, so we'll see what we can unearth about that over the course of our time together here today, and some fun off the top. Tennessee fans, at least some of them, trying to stir the pot between Georgia and Tennessee, the two coaches involved in this rivalry here right now. We'll talk about that and what kind of the story is on all of that today. And we'll kind of head into the weekend where we're going to try to stay dry, enjoy Easter, see if we can get some golf in with the Masters there as well. Weather a factor in all of that. So we're glad to have you with us for it. It is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of Dawg Nation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are very busy on this Friday show. Sounds like last night, Georgia moved a scrimmage that was supposed to be on Saturday up a little earlier just because of weather and things like that. So my advice to you is stay close to DawgNation.com. You want information about what's coming out of UGA practice. You can certainly get plenty of that there over the course of the next 24 hours or so. Georgia putting those finishing touches on what's going to be a terrific G-Day next Saturday. So some of that having to be altered because what we expect to be pretty rough weather here on this particular Saturday. Some of that's going to impact your Masters viewing for those of you into doing that, for your Easter egg hunts and things like that for those of you who are into that there as well. So there is a lot to kind of be mindful of as it relates to the weather this particular weekend. Georgia practice a part of that too. Now, we'll get into that, but for now, let me do something a little bit different because there's something out there today that I think is kind of fun, but I don't think it quite adds up to what some Tennessee fans hope that it does. Not the first time lately that Tennessee fans have hoped for something, not to get it, to be completely frank with you. But there was a statement that Kirby Smart made, I guess it was last Saturday, and there are some people who've tried to sort of make this into a thing. I honestly don't know if it's intended to be a thing, and I'll tell you why here coming up in just a moment. But for some context for where we need to go today, let me go back to last week. Kirby Smart giving us an update on Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, the two quarterbacks primarily right now competing to be Georgia's starting quarterback. And Smart kind of went into a little bit more of what the evaluation is, what he's looking for, and what it takes to be Georgia's starting quarterback, filling the shoes of Stetson Bennett, who just helped lead Georgia to 2 straight national championships. What do you need from Carson, or what do you need from Brock, the eventual starter here at Georgia to begin the 2023 season? Pretty candid stuff from Kirby, and there were some people kind of out there in the internet world, social media world, that kind of wanted to turn this into a little bit of a narrative about something. But nonetheless, for context, this is Kirby Smart last Saturday.
Demeanor and communication. So, like, I can get the stats, but it's like a true quarterback is a decision maker. In our system, because some systems take all the pressure off the quarterback and they just go really fast, we don't do that. We're a quarterback-driven offense. So can you process the information? That means get the signal, get people lined up, then see what the defense is in and figure out, are we in the right situation? Which of these 3 choices Coach Bobo's given me am I going to utilize on this play? And then the play happens, and there might be a mistake or a breakdown, and you not go full metal jacket and have catastrophe mode and put us in a bad situation. So, decision making is the number one thing I want to see at the quarterback position. Can you make consecutive decisions over and over that don't cost our team games? Because we have enough playmakers and we have enough plays that you will make a play inevitably. Don't make a bonehead play. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
So to me, that's a pretty thorough statement from Kirby Smart on the subject of quarterbacks and kind of what he wants to see there. But there were some people, and this was even true last Saturday, and even some Georgia fans kind of noticed this a little bit, the part there kind of in the middle where Kirby Smart says, hey, we want our quarterbacks, I'm paraphrasing here, we want our quarterbacks to be decision makers. We want them to process a lot of information. He says there are some teams who essentially just want to go fast. In other words, they're simplifying the game in order to just go fast, and they're trying to have success through the speed with which they play. And that particular statement from Kirby Smart, kind of comparing and contrasting the Georgia situation where he says, we're asking a lot from our quarterbacks. This is different than other places where they just want to go fast, basically kind of dumbing things down and simplifying things for quarterbacks. there were some people who wanted to pull that out and make that be some sort of statement. And some people kind of turn that into, ooh, this is Kirby subtweeting Josh Huepel from Tennessee. This is one of those statements meant to kind of be a little bit of a needle to Josh Huepel and, some sort of, jab at him because Huepel is a coach who, in the minds of some, just sort of wants to go fast. Well, the fact that Tennessee fans, at least some in some cases, social media, message boards, things like that, the fact that some of them kind of took this as a message about Huepel, even though obviously Kirby doesn't mention Tennessee or Josh Huepel by name or even allude to them in any way, to me this comes across as a little bit of a tell. In other words, if you hear Kirby Smart speaking here and that makes you a little self-conscious or that makes you a little bit aggravated, oh, is he talking about us? That may tell me more about you than it does Kirby Smart. If you even think that remark resembles you, then that may tell me more about you than it does the situation here at Georgia. But nonetheless, it's spring football. Everybody's looking for whatever peg they can grab hold of to have something interesting to talk about here. And so Josh Huepel was kind of asked about his quarterback situation this week, and whether it's by coincidence or whether it was intentionally, it seemed like Josh Huepel offered a little bit of response to the notion that there are some offenses out there that just want to go fast, that aren't asking a lot from their quarterbacks. Josh Huepel seemed intent to let folks know that if that's true anywhere, it's not true here. Here's a little bit of a defensive, a little bit of a sensitive Josh Huepel kind of arguing a little, what's the line from Shakespeare? Thou doth protest a little bit too much. Seems like there's a little bit of a protesting on the part of Josh Huepel here about exactly what he's asking from his quarterbacks. This was sort of thought in some circles to be a clapback from Huepel against Kirby, so we'll stir the pot with it too, I guess. This is Josh Huepel from, I believe it's yesterday.
Our guys control everything. I don't think there's anybody in America that puts more on their quarterbacks. Run checks, run pass checks, load the boxes, alerts, kills. They got to do it all. And so he's highly instrumental in the efficiency and effectiveness of our run game.
So some people took that as, Kirby Smart said, hey, there are some offenses out there that just want to go fast. They're not putting a lot on their quarterbacks. Josh Huepel, who I would say offensively probably goes faster than anybody does right now in college football, says, hey, we're not simplifying things for quarterback when we go fast. I don't think there's anybody in America that puts more on their quarterbacks than we do. Now, all of this is about who prepares you the most for the NFL. And let's face it, there has been this narrative out there when you look at some of the offenses in college football historically that have gone the fastest, that they haven't always prepared their quarterbacks the best for what's going to happen at the next level. And the good news here for Josh Huepel is that we're about to find out exactly how the NFL views his quarterback from the last couple of years that has obviously been so instrumental in the early success that Heupel's had there. We're going to see how the NFL views Hendon Hooker. Do they view him as a first-round pick? Statistically speaking, you would sort of think that he should be viewed that way. How many touchdown passes did he throw? How many points did Tennessee score? Statistically speaking, you would think that Hendon Hooker should be drafted in the first round based on the kind of numbers that he put up. The injury at the end of the season notwithstanding, that's an injury that you recover from. You eventually get better from an ACL tear or whatever knee injury it was that he's dealing with. You eventually get better from that. But the numbers that he put up is the kind of thing at the highest level of play in the SEC. That's the kind of performance that ought to make you a first-round pick. Unless that is, the NFL teams don't believe what Josh Heupel's saying. Unless that is, NFL teams look at the situation at Tennessee, they see speed of offense kind of valued over anything else, and they see a simplified situation where, it's almost, to be frank, it's almost a little bit of a gimmick offense that NFL teams, if they see Hendon Hooker that way, then after the first 32 picks in this year's NFL draft, Hendon Hooker will not hear his name called. So this is one of those things where, excuse me, this is one of those things where I think the NFL draft coming up on April, late April, I think this is one of those things that becomes interesting for Georgia fans and SEC fans beyond just seeing your own team's players get their names called, seeing how the NFL draft actually views Hendon Hooker. The honest truth is they may take him in the first round. Maybe he is that much of a talent. Maybe he is, that impressive. Maybe what Heupel's saying is at least true enough that NFL teams say, yeah, you know what? We view Hendon Hooker as a first-round quarterback. It is fair to point out that what was his name? The former Jets GM on ESPN the other day was talking about how if he had a draft pick, he'd take him in the top 5. And it's also fair to point out that's a guy working on ESPN because he got fired from his previous job. So I'm not quite so sure his opinion necessarily carries a lot of weight, nor should it. But there are at least some people who think that Hendon Hooker is a top prospect and that what Josh Heupel's saying there might be true. But if we watch that first Thursday night of the NFL draft, If we don't see Hendon Hooker's name called, then I'm not quite so sure that Josh Heupel's statement there necessarily carries as much weight as it does, because we at least know this, that the Tennessee offense is at least gimmicky enough that they have sacrificed a lot on defense in order to play the way they do offensively, and thus far that trade-off is not working particularly well for them. And as you move into kind of year 3, where you kind of get to be a little bit of a, if you don't do it now, then you're kind of settling into what you are. That, year 3, year 4, we're going to find out, does Josh Heupel have a chance to be more than just a good coach? Because, listen, Heupel's proven himself to be good. He was surprising in his first year. They were, quite effective in their second year. They clearly beat Alabama. But what do you do year 3, year 4 to take that next step as a program? Right now, I don't see them taking it because the offense is at least gimmicky enough. They've sacrificed too much defense in order to be able to do that. That, to me, is just the objective fact on the ground as it stands right now, and that's the kind of thing that Josh Heupel has to fight against, and how, as I said, how Hendon Hooker gets drafted going to go a long way towards telling us that. But then there's this, back to Kirby Smart, and then we'll wrap it up and talk about something different. I think the people, and a lot of this is coming from Knoxville seemingly, I think the people who want to make this into a thing, I think the people up there in the Smoky Mountains who want to say, oh, it's on between Josh Heupel and Kirby Smart. Y'all, it's not on. It's not. This is not a war of words. This is not a feud. Josh Heupel does not rise to Kirby Smart's level. He just doesn't. Now, he may rise to Nick Saban's level because he's beaten Nick Saban head-to-head. But until he does something on the field to get Kirby Smart's attention, there is no feud between Josh Heupel and Kirby Smart. That's not the case. They are not on the same plane. They are not on the same level. And for the people who think this is some sort of passive-aggressive subtweet on the part of Kirby Smart, I would invite you to go back through the annals of history. We played all this audio for you many times over the years. When Kirby Smart wants to take a jab at a coach, he does not veil it with all kinds of passive-aggressive nonsense. He doesn't. Think about the stuff that he said about Paul Johnson over the years at Georgia Tech. After the 2017 game, he basically admitted, for those of you who've been, because on the show that year, we talked a lot about a revenge tour, Georgia on the revenge tour, and that end of the season in 2017, when they beat Georgia Tech, because Tech had beaten them in 2016, Kirby Smart acknowledged, hey, some of y'all been saying this is the revenge tour. We just got the last box checked on that revenge tour from the previous year. When Kirby Smart wants to take a jab at a coach, he doesn't do it passive-aggressively. The same thing the following year against Paul Johnson, Kirby acknowledged he didn't like competing against the triple option offense. And he said this number one strategy in order not to be bothered by the triple offense is beat that coach enough, and then you want to play him anymore. And that's exactly what happened. Kirby Smart essentially dominated the triple option offense defensively, and Paul Johnson got fired. Kirby basically called his shot on that. I don't think he liked Paul Johnson. I don't think he liked the Paul Johnson style of play, and basically announced preemptively that he was going to dominate Tech to the point that Johnson got fired and we'd never have to play against it again. That's exactly what he did. I think you can see similarly overt statements about Dan Mullen throughout the years. He twisted the knife with Mullen about the whole recruiting issue after the game in 2021, when Mullen was really getting hung out to dry by his own fans and his local media for their lack of recruiting success, Mullen's inability to articulate a recruiting plan going forward. And after that game there in 2021, I believe it was Connor Riley who asked him the question, Kirby went on for like 2 minutes about the importance of recruiting, really twisting that knife in Dan Mullen. When Kirby Smart wants to take a jab at a coach, he doesn't do it passive-aggressively. Gus Malzahn, you get exciting examples there over the course of the years when Malzahn was at Auburn there too. So when and if Kirby Smart ever talks about Josh Heupel, we will know it. It won't be passive-aggressive. It won't be some sort of veiled whatever. It won't be, subtweet. It'll be direct. It'll be unmistakable. This is not what that was. Does Kirby Smart respect the Josh Heupel offense? Maybe not. But was he calling out Josh Heupel? I don't think that's necessarily true either. Tennessee fans seem to have, radar up about this kind of stuff. Josh Heupel himself seems to have an antenna up about some of this kind of stuff. But I would say to Josh Heupel, if your offense isn't gimmicky, then prove that by being a full and complete football team. Prove that by putting Hendon Hooker in the first round of the NFL draft. If you're not a gimmick, then prove it. And if you want to play on Georgia's level, you need to prove that too. Until then, there is no feud between Kirby Smart and Josh Heupel. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is Dawg Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video. We start first in 15, 9:45, DawgNation.com, Dawg Nation app, 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. So happy to have you across all of our video platforms here today, and then, of course, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really, really glad to have you as a part of the program. We have a very busy show for you here today, and of course, it's all made possible by our friends at Kroger. Now, as you're getting ready for Easter and all the great meal that goes along with that, family, friends, getting together, enjoying some great food, enjoying all that kind of great stuff, enjoying the candy that goes in the Easter baskets and things like that. Well, listen, Kroger's got you great savings on all of this right now. You got everything you need for your Easter basket, candy, Easter dyeing kits, so much more. You get all of that right there at your local Kroger. So check out Kroger.com/Easter for a lot more on that. That's Kroger.com/Easter for a lot more on that today. Or just stop by in store and take advantage of all that. That is really, really good stuff. It's great to have you here today. Jeff Sintel coming by. We'll talk some UJ recruiting with Jeff here coming up in just a moment. There's also some interesting news out there about a timeline being a little bit different for college football here in the immediate aftermath of G-Day than maybe we initially anticipated. We'll tell you what's going on with that today, and we'll have some fun golden shoes to wrap things up on a Friday there as well. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, and I want to do something here to kind of lead into Jeff Sintel's conversation with us here coming up in a moment. Jeff had a great story yesterday at DawgNation.com. Jeff able to catch up with what I think is really one of the biggest names in the recruiting sort of landscape for Georgia here in the class of 2024. I'm talking about the five-star defensive lineman, Edric Houston, out of the phenomenal Buford program here in the metro Atlanta area of Georgia. And Edric Houston has now updated his timeline. He's got a late August decision date coming up here, which is certainly worth paying attention to. And Jeff had a chance to talk to Houston about kind of where things stand right now. All the big names, Georgia obviously included, all the big names kind of in battle and in pursuit for Houston right now. And certainly in this particular interview with Jeff, Houston not giving away very much about kind of where things stand for him. Let me read this to you from the story with Jeff Sintel. Of course, there's plenty more in the story. You should read it for yourself at DawgNation.com. But good update from Houston himself on his recruiting situation right now. He says really everybody is in it, meaning all of his top schools. He says, I don't want to just shut off all my options, especially not this early. It is not early, but it's still early enough for me to keep my options open. You never know what could happen with college coaches especially the good ones at Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. The coaches are able to go somewhere else and get a better job than the ones they have there. You never know when the coaches are going to change with assistants moving up and recruiting and things like that. So Houston kind of playing somewhat coy there with that, kind of trying to keep it down the middle in terms of how he views his recruiting process, which I think reinforces what a lot of us kind of already believe, that the battle for Edric Houston here was going to be a big one. And we've seen this sort of play out before. Just because Georgia has the geographic advantage, that doesn't necessarily give it a home field advantage in comparison to the Ohio States and the Alabamas, who as programs themselves have had a lot of success recruiting big-time defensive linemen. Now, there's one thing about Houston's recruitment in general that I want to ask Jeff Sintel about here coming up in just a moment. But I think prior to that, I think it's important to kind of highlight who I think stands as a very pivotal figure in all of this. And it's a coach whose name has, I think, grown in stature a lot with Georgia fans over the course of the last couple of years. And the results on the field, maybe the number one reason why, but in a recruiting situation like this, I think you see the potential for a guy like Trey Scott to even take on an additional level of stardom that he's taken on in the past, that Georgia has for itself right now one of the best defensive line coaches that exists anywhere in college football. Georgia has one of those guys right now in the person of Trey Scott. And there have been some rumors and some chatter this past offseason. Well, maybe Scott moves up and takes a defensive coordinator position somewhere else. Maybe he does something like that. Georgia was able to hold on to Trey Scott. I think that's a really good thing. And finding a way to hold on for as long as you can in the future going to be a big deal here there as well. So as Edric Houston says, hey, I'm looking right now at all my top schools, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Georgias, and I'm looking at those coaching staffs, for those programs. Seeing a guy like Trey Scott and the impact he's able to make here becomes really, really important. So as a way of kind of emphasizing that, let me remind you of just how complimentary Kirby Smart has been, but as defensive line coach Trey Scott in the past. Trey obviously trying to do good stuff with Edric Houston here right now. This is Kirby Smart on Trey Scott.
He's young, he's energetic, he's one of the best teachers and developers I've ever been around. He pours into his young men. His unit takes a lot of pride in their performance as a unit, and you see it kind of reflect in the way he leads. He's got a great family, great wife. I mean, he's a class act. He represents the University of Georgia the right way, and he grew up under one of the legendary defensive line gurus and teachers named Pete Jenkins. And Pete is kind of world renowned for developing coaches. And Trey came up under Pete. And, when you get one of Pete's guys, you're going to get a good one. And we've been able to do that. We've been very blessed to have Trey and his family here. And he does a wonderful job recruiting, pushing young men, challenging young men, and developing young men so that when they leave here, they're much better off.
This is one of those things where if you're a Georgia fan, and I think it's way too early to know exactly how this Edric Houston recruitment is going to play out, but what you hope is the proof is in the pudding. Obviously, for a defensive end like Houston, the example of Trayvon Walker, very similar position, who goes on to be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, you hope that stands as a proof of concept here. But in addition to that, this year's NFL draft as an interior defensive lineman features Jalen Carter, who's going to be drafted in the top 5, probably, at least the top 10. Last year's NFL draft, in addition to Walker going number 1 overall, Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis, they themselves also became first-rounders there as well. That Georgia's on-field performance for defensive line, I don't think it could be better here over the course of the last couple of seasons. What you really hope is a guy like Houston sees that. A guy like Houston sees, and I even said this more in the story with Jeff Sintel, of who's going to develop me, who's going to get the most out of me, who's going to turn me into the most valuable football commodity I can be on the other side of this football career. And I don't know that anyone right now can point to more tangible proof of their success than Trey Scott, than Georgia, than this particular defensive line. And what you really hope is that stands as a real example of what Edric Houston could be here at UGA. If you're a UGA fan, I don't know that there are too many bigger names than Houston to consider for this class of 2024. Really interesting stuff with Jeff Sintel and Houston there at DawgNation.com. I think you should read that for yourself. And as I said before, I think you should stay close to DawgNation.com there as well. All weekend long, updates from spring practice. Georgia seemingly has moved its scrimmage. It was supposed to take place on Saturday, moved it up last night. So you get some information there coming up on that. Who's looking good and who's kind of making a name for themselves as you head towards G-Day next Saturday. Something we'll get to see with our own eyes. Looking forward to all of that. So DawgNation.com's got you covered on that all weekend long and for the next week as we head towards G-Day there on April 15th. But for now, here on Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Kroger, for more on Edric Houston and a very interesting potential development for Georgia in its pursuit of a 5-star quarterback as well. There's some new stuff I hear on this that we'll tell you about here coming up in just a moment. So let's cover all of that right now with Jeff Sintel here on Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So let me bring in Jeff Sintel here, Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. Great story at the website yesterday, DawgNation.com, with 5-star defensive lineman Edric Houston. I'd put Houston up there as much as anybody. I mean, we've obviously talked a lot about Dylan Raiola the last couple of weeks, but to me, Houston's right there alongside Raiola in terms of importance here for this 2024 class. And, Jeff, I'm always curious of your insight from your conversations, because what I read at DawgNation.com was a guy in Houston that's certainly not giving you a very emotional statement one way or another. Seems pretty analytical about this. Did not seem to reveal a ton. I don't think. We read a quote from the story before you joined us here just a moment ago where it seems like he's kind of trying to keep everybody in play and trying to make the best decision. It'll end here late summer, as you reported there at DawgNation.com. But for now, it sort of seems like this is still anyone's recruitment to win, at least from that group of top schools, which of course includes Georgia. What else did you take from your conversation with Houston?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Happy Masters Friday. Happy Good Friday, most importantly. Brandon, the way I tried to do that was a little bit of parallel processing because, there's a lot of kids out there that almost feel nervous if they don't have their official visits already set up by now. And some of them have had them set up for weeks and months at a time. But Edric kind of looks at that the way he looks at like it's a prom. Everybody else is going to wear this flashy type suit with, pastels or leopard prints or whatever. And he's just going for a classic, white and black tux, more white actually than black. A very stately madman, Dom Draper type man, Brennan, if you will. I know that's one of your favorites. But Edric's a guy that he doesn't look like he's in any hurry at all. He's not going to enroll early because he knows once he gets to college, that's grown man stuff, and he's going to have to work. So he wants to soak up the high school experience a little bit more. He's not in a rush with his official visits, but seems clear that like Georgia Clemson, Ohio State. He's at Ohio State today, and I think that what's very interesting there is this is going to be his first real trip to Columbus, where he's taken a trip for a game for the Notre Dame game last year. They're a principal contender for Houston, it feels like to me. Clemson is another school he visited this week, and Georgia's another school he visited this week. Brendan, if you want your reading through the tea leaves segment of our conversation today, I thought it was interesting how he mentioned community, how he mentioned the atmosphere and the environment in both Clemson and Ohio State. But then when I asked him, and really I laid it out exactly in the story as a conversation with, what did you like best about Clemson? He mentioned community. He mentioned you can talk to anybody. He mentioned how open the campus is. And then I asked him the same thing about Ohio State, and he went on to very specific examples about it seems like the fans really support the team. He had a lot of energy. Then I asked him about Georgia, and he kind of just said everything. And to me, that was a different part of that interview where it wasn't just the crowd. It wasn't just the coaches. It wasn't just the development. And really, we were able to key on one certain thing with Edric Houston, is he is going to go to the place that he feels can develop him the most. And it's funny, in college football recruiting, Brandon, Edric mentioned that he's playing weight's about 265. And he's like, he's a little too big for Coach D's room. That's Coach Ozudribe's room for the outside linebackers. So I guess the prize he gets for being a little too big to be a part of Nolan Smith's Wolfpack room is he gets to go with the Future Millionaires Club with Travion Scott on the defensive line. And, that's a guy, Brandon, Georgia has prioritized him for the longest time. The new quarterback Sherpa recruiter, which is Montgomery Van Gorder, everybody calls him Gummy. He's a Buford High guy. He came up out of the Buford High School program, and yet he still continues to recruit Edric Houston as hard as anyone, even though his lane is now five-star quarterback lane. This is a guy, Brandon, I've said it for a while. He was always the number one top target on the top targets list until he dropped down to 2 because this stuff with Dylan Raiola in Georgia, I feel, is real. And I feel, say what you want about whether Dylan Raiola is a generational quarterback, but what will happen if Dylan Raiola does choose Georgia is he will bring more likely generational players alongside with him. That's wide receivers, that's running backs, that's other guys, that's tight ends that could add to the class. And I think you're more likely to get at least one truly great player out of maybe the whole Pied Piper Act happening, potentially with Dylan Raiola.
So I want to get to the Raiola part of this here in a minute because there are some very interesting developments on that we need to talk about. But let me tell you what the Edric Houston thing kind of reminds me of right now, and I'm curious to hear from you how much you think things have changed. This reminds me of a conversation that you and I have had a lot over the years where when you are a truly elite prospect, and Edric Houston obviously is, 3-4 defensive end can be a little bit of a tough sell. I go back to like Miles Murphy's recruitment. Murphy went to Clemson. That's a 4-3 program. He got a chance to be kind of like more of like the edge rusher type player in that defense. So when I'm hearing you say, Houston understands he's a little bit too big to be an outside linebacker at Georgia, kind of that edge rush position, and so therefore he ends up being the 3-4 defensive end. That's not always been the kind of thing that people have wanted to be, elite players like Houston at a place like Georgia. But obviously a lot has changed in the last 2 years because Trayvon Walker from that spot became the dadgum number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. So let me ask you, how much is Walker as a proof of concept? How much has that raised the profile of 3-4 defensive end, a position that maybe at times has been thought not to be that sexy? How much does that all of a sudden now become the kind of place where a guy can say, I can go on to NFL stardom playing this position, where a couple of years ago, I just think that Georgia had a hard time convincing players of that?
Wow, Brandon, you got me smiling on Friday morning. Not only was that a great question, I wish we could give Brandon some sort of award for great questions from the interview podium. It was a great question, and it was a relevant and topical question. But then you had the phrase "dadgum number 1" in there as well, which perfectly describes it for me, because the last 2 years have certainly changed. Brandon, it's not just dadgum number 1 Trayvon Walker; it's dadgum future number 1 Michael Williams.
Yeah,
where they can put a talent like that and they can show it. And really, I went straight to the task on the question with Edric about, how do you feel about Travion Scott getting you to where you need to go? And he kind of gushed about it because he's like, look what he's done, taking guys and getting them into the league, and a lot of different variety of body types and guys into the league now. When you start looking at some of the Travion Scott resume, I kind of think it's funny about those old threads on the forum, DawgNation.com, Dawg Nation forum, about people were actually wondering about Travion Scott and whether he can get it done. And I would argue now he has as much job security as any assistant coach in the country in terms of what he does for the Bulldogs, not only picking the right guys, finding the right gems, but molding those dadgum number ones into surefire number ones. The one thing I will say about Edric is I don't know if he gives himself enough credit, and probably because that's why he's so humble. Brent, I like to throw things in there. I hope that the average reader may not pick up on, but I say it enough. I want it to maybe wedge something into their head a little bit. Brandon, what he's doing, and he's lost some weight right now. He's 6'4.5". He's about 255 for track season. Brandon, I thought it was already astounding when he ran 400 meters this spring or this late winter in 54 seconds and some change. And I asked him, what are your further goals when that's already astounding for a defensive lineman to run the 400 like that? And he said he's going to get it into the 52-second range. And, Brandon, that is a quantum leap in terms of that size, that athlete, which means that he's still probably going to be good enough to float from room to room, but he sounds like he's satisfied and content if he's simply a defensive lineman if he chose Georgia. I think that's a really big developmental piece going on behind the scenes. And I guess when we think about Edric Houston, I think I'm only doing my job to tell everybody out there that he did grow up in Atlanta. He wasn't a transplant to Gwinnett County from somewhere else. His probably ultimate dream in football is to play for the Falcons or the Falcons, whatever you want to call it, depending on your dialects this morning.
Wait, does anyone call them the Falcons? Hold on. Does anybody call them the Falcons?
I had a British theme going through my mind right there for some reason, but Brandon, for the Falcons, it's a big deal. And he also, I'm not going to bury the lead here, he also grew up in a family full of Georgia fans, so the Dogs will always be right there in his heart.
You love that. All right, so let's go from one 5-star to another, because there is, I think, some very interesting stuff out there involving, in a roundabout way, 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. I'll start with this. Quarterback named Elijah Brown, who goes to Mater D, has been quoted that's out in California, big-time program. A lot of folks are aware of that. He's been quoted this week saying that USC has amped up its recruitment of him as of late. Now, I guess I'd ask you, is that true? Because if it is, Jeff, that is a very interesting piece of evidence that all the online chatter connecting Dylan Raiola and Georgia as of late, that must be true. If USC is now recruiting a different quarterback, if Nebraska seems like they've kind of waved the white flag here a little bit, all of a sudden now, by process of elimination, you are definitely substantiating Georgia's relationship with Raiola here. Do you think it's true that that USC is now recruiting a different quarterback? And by the way, I guess to add to this, we started our show today by talking about coaches allegedly subtweeting other coaches. There were some people who thought that Lincoln Riley subtweeted Raiola this week when he was talking about, if you don't want to compete at quarterback, that's not the place for you, or something along those lines. So a lot of circumstantial evidence here that seems to suggest that USC believes it might be out of it with Dylan Raiola. How real is that, Jeff?
Yeah, Brendan, that's a lot to talk about there. Number one, I think, listen, Lincoln Riley can tweet all he wants to, but let's just look at the way quarterbacks have thought for the last 4 or 5 years. When you stack up a lot of quarterbacks, kind of like what Georgia did when they stacked up Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, and Gunnar Stockton, that next cycle is going to be hard. And that's exactly what USC has with Caleb Williams and Malachi Nelson and what they're trying to do going forward with the quarterback position. They've got a lot of dudes stacked up there where the next 2 or 3 years are pretty much booked out, or at least reserved for a talent that's already on campus. Very hard to counteract that. I'm going to do 2 things here. One, I'm going to make a clear statement. And then number 2, I'm going to ask you what, in your mind, some of these things think, and which is the most important. Here's my clear statement, Brandon. When it comes to Dylan Raiola and Georgia, I can say with some certainty that they're not really recruiting anyone else. There's no backup plan, especially, and I'm going to say this, when they have the luxury and confidence of already having a guy like Ryan Puglisi in the class. I feel like I'm doing our audience a disservice with all this Raiola talk. I don't continue to mention that Puglisi is acting like Brandon Adams' firstborn son would be when it comes to Georgia when he's a quarterback commitment, which means he sounds and acts and is going to be a proud Bulldog, and he doesn't care who's coming in, because that separation is there a little bit in quarterback position, along with all the heartfelt thoughts and leans towards the University of Georgia. But for me, when I think of this Raiola commitment, the best chance Georgia has for Raiola, and Brennan, I want this to kind of really sink in. It's not championships. It's not fancy facilities. The most important drawing card for Georgia right now is that practice field, because the players see it, and they do two things. One, they went all around. They went all the way around. And I'm not talking about the grass here. I'm talking about the dudes on the grass. They go all around and they see other schools practice, Brandon. I could write some scathing articles what I've heard from people about, hey, I go see this school practice and then I go see this school practice, and it's not even close. There's no energy. There's no juice. Georgia really does act like it's eating off the floor. Dominic Raiola, Dylan's own father, said that Georgia acts like they haven't won a thing and they're all coaching for their jobs, and it is very, very different. That's a big thing. That's like when somebody else listens to another daily podcast for Georgia football compared to the flagship Dawg Nation Daily. There's a clear difference there. Now, the second thing I want to have a little fun here, Brandon, is, to me, I have a pecking order in my mind, but I want to ask you, which one of these clues, because I know you follow them all across the interwebs, which one of these clues is the most telling for you? Is it social media avatar decoration with pro-Georgia images for Raiola? Is it Georgia is not recruiting any other quarterbacks besides Dylan Raiola along with Ryan Puglisi? That's two. Number three, is it there's only one official visit scheduled right now for Dylan Raiola, and that's to the University of Georgia? That's a lot with just those three. Or then finally, four, is it the news that you hear Southern Cal, one of the chief contenders for Raiola, is shopping elsewhere and trying to make sure it's got a plan B or a plan 1A when it comes to the quarterback spot in this class?
Yeah,
Which one of those things seems like the most important?
Well, it's definitely the last two, right? Because, I mean, we saw Georgia go all in on Arch Manning a year ago, and that obviously didn't work out. The gear on social media, that's been a false positive a million different times in the past. So it's really the last two. Primarily, I'd say it's the fact that he only has the one official visit scheduled right now. That's a pretty telling thing, especially paired with the fact that we now have a lot of internet reporting that USC's recruiting a different quarterback. To me, you pair those two things together. I'll tell you what this reminds me of, Jeff. And look, I'm also open that something could change and somehow you could have last minute whatever with all of this. But Jeff, this reminds me a lot of the Justin Fields recruitment in that. And I'm not a reporter. I don't do recruiting stuff for a living. I follow recruiting. I don't report recruiting. But when I figured out that Justin Fields was coming to Georgia, the way that I figured that out was it became obvious that he wasn't going anywhere else. You had all this circumstantial evidence. Well, he's not going here, and he's not going here, and he's not going here. Eventually, Georgia was all that there was left. And if the Raiola thing is really playing out the way that the internet would have you believe right now, he's not going to Nebraska. There's growing evidence he's not going to USC. It sort of gets to the point where Georgia's the only thing that there is left. And unless something changes, it just sort of feels like that's what the momentum is right now.
Brandon, you're getting Dark Knight detective Bruce Wayne level sleuthing on all this right now, because to me, you and I have never had this conversation, but that's what it feels like. And, the Justin Fields story, I don't know if we've ever told the whole Justin Fields story, especially the prequels, because nobody wants to hear what happens after he gets to Georgia, what happens after that. But Justin, for the longest time, was a very secret lean to Georgia. And that was even, when most people forget he was committed to Penn State as well. But then right after that, Georgia heats up, and then you go through his spring when Justin sets the world on fire. He's running 4.5 laser 40s, and for the longest time. Then you saw the Matt Corral thing, where Matt Corral, comes to Georgia, and then he decides, well, let's be in Georgia, but not anymore. There was a lot of circumstantial things. But for me, this is what I would just double down on. If Georgia gets Dylan Raiola, I think the Bobo thing would be great. I think the Stafford thing would be great. I think the offensive lineman would be great. All that stuff is great. But in the end, a talent like that, when Dylan wants to accomplish big, big things in college football and he wants to play on those big stages that Georgia's been on for the last few years, he's simply going to look at Georgia. He's going to take a calculated measure of who he knows behind the scenes might be coming to Georgia and who he knows is already at Georgia. And he's going to realize that I want to practice against those guys all day. And that's the true competition I want, and not so much competition, depth chart competition at quarterback. That's what he thinks is really the furnace that's going to get him to find his best football. And that's going against other All-American, hardwired dudes, kind of like what Amarius Min said yesterday in his presser. He wants to go against guys that are hungry and that want to eat off the floor and play against the very best players in the country because he knows Georgia will end up with a lot of them.
All right, in the time we have left, I want to change the subject and talk about something completely different. We kind of had some fun the other day on the show about one of these national websites that had its story about, here are the incoming freshmen to be most paying attention to during spring games. And somehow the back-to-back national champions who had, the number 2 recruiting class in the country this past year, somehow they didn't have a name on the list, despite the fact they're like 21 or 20, whatever number, early enrollees for Georgia here right now. So, we've been trying to figure out, since the national media won't give them any attention, who are the Georgia freshmen who you'd be most excited about seeing on G-Day? These are guys that you covered as recruits. We're about to see them in a Georgia uniform for the first time next Saturday. I think Lawson Lucky's an easy name here because it seems like he's gotten a lot of buzz here this spring. I think that Roderick Robinson's an easy name here because he's obviously got an expanded opportunity because of the injury to a couple of other Georgia running backs. So if I spot your Roderick and I spot your Lawson Lucky, Jeff, give me, a small handful of additional names there of, guys that you think will be most notable as early enrollees in a Georgia uniform for the first time next Saturday.
Brandon, it's funny. It feels like talking Masters picks with somebody right now because basically you just took the John Rahm and the Scotty Scheffler off the board when you talk about those two guys right there in terms of your Masters pools. Because I'm going to say this. I'm just going to underscore it in bold-faced and italicized. Maybe the shining star so far in terms of a surprise, a burst, has been Lawson Lucky. I'm just going to leave it at that. He has turned a lot of heads. He had a big touchdown. He had some explosives. He's really ready to go. And that was no shock if you've been following a lot of our reporting on Lawson over the years. Robinson is great, especially because he's got a lot of tread on the tires. Be interested to see what his weight looks like at G-Day and how fit he is. Because, if Georgia could ever get him at 225, 228, 230, right around there, he would be a really fast thunder back, really hard to get on the ground. But I guess the name I go to, Brandon, kind of centers on weight a little bit. I want to see how healthy and how fit Jamal Jarrett is because if Jamal Jarrett is somewhere around 330, 340 in his career, that's going to be the narrative we heard for the entire Jordan Davis career in Georgia. Kirby Smart and Travion Scott and just wanting to get the weight off of him. I think the name that I'd be doing malpractice if I didn't mention it would be TJ Allen. For me, that guy has got everything between the ears. He's got everything physically. He's got everything in the tool bag for him to earn his own comparison one day, and that's probably the greatest thing I can say about CJ is I think people will one day be comparing great linebackers at Georgia to CJ Allen, more so than everybody rushing to say he's another middle Georgia phenom like a Roquan Smith or if he's a cross between a Monty Rice and a Kobe Dean and all that stuff. I think he's going to make his own name at Georgia. It's clearly motivated. Our next generation story this week should go up today. It's about C.J. Allen. I think A.J. Harris, Brandon, I'm going to categorize him as you know who that person that has been that standby, that one that was always locked in for the longest. And sometimes with recruiting classes, people tend to forget the first one to come through. Like A.J. Harris was the first. Remember when he committed to Georgia, Brandon? He was still a 5-star, and then he was seeing nowhere else, and then the ranking slid. How many times have we seen that with the recruiting industry where a player certainly looks like a 5-star when there are 3 or 4 teams after him, but then like when there's no chance and there's no drama and the kid is locked down and not visiting anywhere, and all of a sudden the recruiting rankings fall from like number 25 in the country to number 35 or 40.
Funny how that works out. Yeah, it's funny how that works out.
It's kind of of a marketing business, no doubt about it. It's a smart business model. You got to sell the current sizzle. And then, I think I could say a lot about Raylan Wilson. We've written about Jonel Aguero. I'd like to see him do a little bit more. I'd like to hear a little bit more out of Jonel Aguero so far. And then nobody gets excited about offensive linemen, Brandon, but I really want to see how Monroe Freeland can hold up out on the edge against a quartet, against a sextet, I guess, of really hungry outside rushers. I mean, I think, Brandon, let's be real. Let's try to be calculated and topical and honest here. The really people that should flash in this spring game and this spring drills for Georgia would be some of those 2022 freshmen and redshirt freshmen. Heard some good things about C.J. Madden. That's another guy that kind of got buried under the weight of guys like, Darius Smith, or then like the new faces coming in like the Samuel Ntemba, the Damon Wilson, the Gabe Harris. Everybody wants to go over the shiny new things, but really a lot of those guys that were kind of back-tier players in the 2022 class that got redshirted and didn't look like Malachi Starks and Mikael Williams and Jalen Walker, those quick immersions, those quick flash guys, I think this has been a very important spring for them as well.
Really interesting stuff, Jeff. I really appreciate that. I hope you're heading towards a happy Easter weekend. We appreciate your time here on Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Kroger today. Enjoy, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Falcons and dadgum #1, folks. Remember that if you remember anything out of the show.
No doubt, Jeff. Thanks so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so Jeff at one point in time was like, yeah, whether you say Falcons or you say Falcons, it's sort of like, hey, you say tomato, I say tomato. I've actually never met anyone who says tomato. I don't think I live in like a fancy enough like area. Like, I don't think my circle is, fancy enough to have anybody who actually says tomato, nor do I think anybody ever says Falcon. I guess you've heard Millennium Falcon before, although I would say Millennium Falcon. So I don't know. That's it's a very interesting observation from Mr. Centel right there. More of those kinds of observations, by the way, coming up on our Dawg Nation cruise. We're getting close, y'all. Post G-Day, we're essentially there, which I'm excited about and ready for. I know many of you are there too. After spring practice and things like that, you sort of need a little bit of a recharging of the batteries, and a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, we believe, is the best way to do all of that. And obviously, we wish that everybody could be with us on board the Independence of the Seas. We're going to be leaving out of Port Canaveral on April 24th. April 28th is when it ends. That's the last night of the draft of the cruise, by the way. It's the first round of the NFL draft. This huge draft party. We have so many special things. We have an amazing trivia contest we're doing, so many special events for Dawg Nation folks on our Dawg Nation cruise. It's going to be an unbelievable time, and I'm really excited about having all of you there with us for it. And if you can't be with us for this, wish you could be, but if you can't be, next best thing is getting your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I continue to hear from so many of you, and we'll actually share this more before we're done in today's show, about you connecting with the Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, using our friend Jessica Slater to help book that up with you. And it just sounds like Dawg Nation's enjoying this right now just as much as I am, which makes me very, very happy. So give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's Jessica Slater, travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. The one we've trusted to handle all of our booking needs for our Dawg Nation cruise, the one we would recommend for your own booking needs for your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also check out a website that she's put together called RoyalDogs.com. It was initially a website to sort of educate folks about the Dawg Nation cruise, but you can use that as a way of accessing, her info there too, RoyalDogs.com for more on that. Can't wait to see you on board of the Dawg Nation cruise coming up April 24th through the 28th. Boy, what a great time that is going to be. All right, so let's talk about something here for a moment. This is important. Nicole Auerbach, long time, I guess, sort of national type, reporter type, working for The Athletic. She put something on Twitter that I think is worth our attention. Let me show this to you here for a moment. So she says, FYI, the spring transfer window for college football begins April 15th. Not sure if everyone realized it moved up because it's supposed to be May the 1st. But she kind of cites something here from the Division I Council's October meeting. I'm going to read this a little bit. This is super boring, but this is important. So follow me through this boring thing to get something important. She quotes here, the council adopted proposal, blah, 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 as non-controversial legislation in football effective immediately to move the spring notification of transfer from May 1st to the 15th to April 15th through the 30th. The thing from the NCAA goes on to say the change in the spring window allows coaches and student athletes to have athletics participation conversations after spring football and before the start of the summer athletics activities, allowing student athletes time to enter the transfer portal, evaluating opportunities at other institutions, and arrive at a new institution before beginning summer. So the point is it was supposed to be May the 1st to the 15th, but apparently it's been changed to April 15th through the 30th. And I didn't know this. I don't know that anybody necessarily did. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are smarter than me, but this is new news for me. So what was supposed to be a spring portal window starting in May actually begins on G-Day. Now, obviously on a Georgia-themed show, our next question is going to always be, well, is this good or bad news for Georgia? And I guess in a roundabout way, it's probably whatever you think. You can take that down now if you want to. It's probably, whatever you might think. You could sort of argue this both ways. Like on the one hand, hey, better to go ahead and start doing all this, not have to wait till May, because that just gives you more time, as the statement of the NCAA said, more time to kind of get into your summer activities and have your roster set going into that. But on the other hand, the one thing we know is the worst kept secret in all of college athletics is that tampering is a real thing. So if the transfer portal opens on April 15th, you got to assume there's tampering being taken place with guys on rosters right now. Does that become a distraction for them as they go through spring practice? I guess that's the first question I ask is that no one seems to have the appetite to actually do anything about tampering, which I think is a huge mistake. I think you only have a sport to the extent that you have rules to govern the sport, and not acknowledging this as a rule, I think it's just kind of a silly thing. So if the portal opens April 15th now, as Nicole Auerbach is reporting there, that means guys are being tampered with right now, both at Georgia and other places, as they're going through spring practice. So is that an issue? I'm not quite so sure. But moving this up really, really matters, because that means on G-Day and then the 2 weeks to follow that, it's going to be Wild West, possibly, maybe. It's important to note that last year, after the spring practices came to a conclusion, that the transfer portal actually probably wasn't as crazy as some folks thought it was going to be. It actually ended up being a little tamer than maybe we anticipated. But that doesn't mean the same thing's going to be true this particular year on this window that we now understand to be April 15th through the 30th. Let me give you a piece of evidence that proves that. Because Hugh Freeze said something. This is the Auburn coach, of course. Hugh Freeze said something this week that gives you an idea of just how wild all of this could be. Let me find this quote because I want to make sure I read this accurately. So he said this, and he kind of said it kind of flippantly and casually when he's not talking about wanting to schedule somebody else for a spring game. He sort of said this kind of off the cuff here this week, and some folks were like, wait, what? All right, so he goes on to say this. I'm going to read the entire quote from Hugh Freeze. This is from AL.com. He says, none of us have ever dealt with this spring portal, meaning the one that's about to open up on April 15th. He says, this is going to be our first experience with it. It can affect you both ways. I think you can lose some that may not want to lose, and obviously you hope that there's some out there that you can track to help create more depth and experience in the team. Now, listen to what he goes on to say here. He says, we're going to take a few more offensive linemen, another safety, another corner, a rush guy, and we'll take a quarterback if it's the right one that's out there. So Hugh Freeze just told us they're going to take a few offensive linemen, potentially 3 starters on defense, and then maybe another quarterback if there's one on sale. Can you believe? This is an idea. This is an Auburn team saying we're looking for as many as 5 positions or whatever. So if that's what Auburn's saying, you better believe that Florida's saying the same thing. We talked about Tennessee off the top. I'm sure they'd like to find an SEC-level defensive starter. Goodness knows they don't have enough of those, as evidence would point out. 63 points allowed to South Carolina, just one example of that. So there are a lot of SEC teams going to have their hand in the air saying we are open for business. If there are big-time transfers that enter the portal, we are open for business to bring you in. Last year at this time, I think this is just objectively true, the SEC level player in the transfer portal, there actually just weren't a lot of them. For whatever reason, there just weren't very many of them. So does all of this, I guess, situation right now, does this create a large-scale amount of players shopping around? Guys who've been through spring practice, they don't like where they are on the depth chart. They don't like kind of how that stands. Does this create a wilder portal? I honestly don't know, and I think we're all going to have to find this out. It could be, quiet like it was a year ago, but my guess is it actually kind of won't be that quiet if guys like Hugh Freeze are saying we're looking for 5 starters. That gives you an idea of how wild and crazy all of this could be here in just a little bit. And by the way, all of this kind of creates dominoes too, because let's not speculate about Georgia. Let's just use some other program for a minute. Let's say it's Alabama, just for the sake of conversation. Let's say that someone is pried off the Alabama roster. Well, if that happens, now all of a sudden Alabama's got to go out and get an Alabama-level player to bring into its program. All of a sudden now you got this guy falling this way, and all of a sudden, that it's like how the coaching carousel begats more change at coaches, because once one guy gets plucked, now that program's going to pluck from somewhere else. That's the other thing that's going to happen here, and you better hope that you don't lose your starter April 30th, because at that point in time the transfer portal's closed. So, I mean, it's going to be pretty weird and pretty wild here, and I think that Hugh Freeze's words on all of that give us a pretty strong indication. Finally, one more thing here. A guy who's been pretty outspoken as of late has been ESPN analyst Greg McElroy. And McElroy was talking on he has his podcast, does his thing. And so he's trying to sort of calm the nerves of some not Falcons fans. I got Falcons on the brains after Jeff Sentel's Falcon line a moment ago. He was trying to calm the nerves of some Florida fans. And Greg McElroy's trying to, I guess, kind of let the Florida fans down easy, sort of talk them off the ledge here a little bit. Because he says when it comes to Florida, they're going to be good again. This is a quote from Greg McElroy during his podcast. Everything is cyclical, but McElroy says, I just don't think the Gators are going to be very good this year. With all due respect to the Florida Gators, what they bring back, there are still question marks. You're still figuring things out on defense. That's the case. The other thing I don't think anyone's talking about enough as it relates to Florida is they lost transfer offensive linemen. Their offensive line, on a team last year that was pretty wretched, their offensive line actually wasn't too bad. That was actually a strength for Florida, believe it or not, a year ago. And I think on paper right now, it sort of stands the Florida offensive line actually expects to be worse this year than it was a year ago. So take a team that had a losing record last year and give them a worse offensive line. How does that work out, typically speaking? Some of y'all seen enough football to know on that particular point. So that's the point that Greg McElroy is making, that Florida, one of these days you'll be good again. Eventually the sun will shine down there in Gainesville again, I guess, but just not this year. And I believe that McElroy's probably right about that. Unless, to go back to what he said a moment ago, I truly believe that Billy Napier last year, this is one of those things I just sort of have a strong intuition on. I truly believe that Billy Napier, and part of the reason why I have a strong intuition about this, because Napier himself sort of said this, that he basically announced, hey, nobody's going to be more active in the transfer portal than we're going to be. If I had to guess, I believe that Billy Napier had a template like what Mel Tucker had done in 2021 at Michigan State. They built a Big Ten contender almost solely out of the transfer portal. And I think that Billy Napier thought he might be able to do the same thing at Florida. But as I told you before, there just were not a large number of elite-level players in last year's spring transfer portal, the portal that existed after, Napier had gotten the job there at Florida. There just wasn't – we've had supply chain issues. There were supply chain issues in the transfer portal a year ago. The shelves just were not very well stocked. And so Billy Napier, after calling his shot of we're going to go and be as aggressive as anybody in the transfer portal, they didn't really have a lot of guys to take. And even some of the guys I think he was hoping to process out of the Florida program, they ended up sticking around because Napier's like, we don't really have anybody to replace you with. This is me guessing, but that was kind of what kind of went on there. So I think that what Greg McElroy is saying right there about Florida is likely true. My guess is that Florida's probably heading for another losing season. But Florida or Auburn or so-and-so in the SEC, I think fortunes could be changed if you get enough transfer players and if you have enough room for transfer players and if there's a high enough level of transfer player out there. So the point is we're going to have, a relatively calm week next week. We'll have a really fun G-Day, and then after that, we're going to buckle our seatbelts for what could be a wild ride for a couple of weeks. And obviously, we'll be here for every twist and turn of all of that. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, we're heading towards a weekend, and this is obviously a pretty busy weekend. A lot of us getting ready to enjoy Easter with our families and all the stuff that goes along with that. A lot of folks are also trying to settle in, hopefully get a chance to watch some golf at the Masters if the weather will cooperate. And of course, when we think about going into a weekend, we try to have a big finish to our Friday to go into that weekend. Of course, when we think about big finish around here, we also think about our friends at the Finish Long Drink there as well. And I saw a really funny Finish Long Drink meme. I want to show this to you on the screen here for a moment. So one of the things you hear me talk about a lot is the Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. So what the Finish Long Drink put out on Twitter this. They said, hey, it's basically the same thing. So you can be either getting strong by drinking some Finnish long drink or getting strong by working out hard in the gym. Now, I don't have to tell you which of those two I'm probably a little bit more familiar with. A lot more familiar with the long drink strong than I am the gym strong, but nonetheless, whatever you're enjoying in that particular direction this weekend, we hope you enjoy it. Of course, the Finnish long drink, if you've never tried it before, this is a great chance for you to enjoy that and find out what it's all about. You can go to thelongdrink.com and put in your zip code. You can find out where you can pick up some Finnish long drink here today, whether it be the long drink strong, you want to try that, or the long drink cranberry, which obviously is the cranberry flavor, the traditional, the blue can, the gin kick, the grapefruit flavor, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. For those of you who do want to kind of work on your gym physique a little bit, that's a great choice for all of that. Whichever option you think you'd like, you can sort of figure it out. There's also the 8-can variety pack that gives you 2 different cans of each of the 4 Finnish long drink varieties. When you're there at the website, thelongdrink.com, you can also find out about the great story that kind of tells us how the Finnish long drink ended up here in America. Started in Helsinki back in the 1950s when the Summer Games were there, and it's been in America now for a few years. Now it's in Georgia and everywhere else. So go to thelongdrink.com, learn more about the Finnish long drink story, and find out where you can pick some up. I think it's great for spring and summer, being outside a lot more. To me, the Finnish long drink just goes great when you're outside. So try some Finnish long drink today online at thelongdrink.com. All right. Great collection of golden shoes to go into a weekend with. Let me show you the first one on the screen here. I thought this was really funny. Speaking of Florida, and part of the reason they're so bad right now is their previous coach was really bad too. And so, speaking of Dan Mullen, he put this out on Twitter the other day. He goes, where am I? Basically, a nice tropical location. And he lets folks know that he's in, is it Abacos? Abacos? Where is that? I've never even heard of that. You can tell I'm not a rich person because, like, rich people are going to a place I've never even heard of. Like, I have no idea where Gabbers on Guana Cay is. So apparently Dan Mullen living that charmed life with the $1 million whatever buyout he got. Well, Dawg on Twitter says it gives me great satisfaction to know that the Gators have financed a luxury life for you, Dan. Well done, which I think is really funny, knowing that all that buyout money that Florida had to give Dan, he's using to go to tropical locations like this. Very funny from Dawg there on that. And then somebody making fun of me, speaking of lousy stinking Gators. So we had Tony Barnhart the other day on, and Tony was talking about, a very important cause that he's raising money for. And he mentioned one of the guys that's helping him with this is former Florida quarterback Danny Wuerffel, who is legitimately a great guy. And Derek Green writes in to say, when Tony Barnhart mentioned Danny Wuerffel, the true Gator hater that came out of BA. And so you see, if you're watching a video, this sort of scowl on my face. I will tell you a story. Part of the reason why I think that what Derek says is so funny there is because when Tony, who's a great guest, when he mentioned Danny Wuerffel, I was about to come in and sort of say something snarky and, classless or whatever it is that I would, might do in a situation like that. And then I remembered, oh, yeah, they're raising money for an important cause in Honduras, so let me not make fun of Danny Wuerffel this particular time and at least sort of let him get some credit for doing something good alongside Tony Barnhart right there. So I paused and prevented myself from making some sort of joke at the expense of Danny Wuerffel, and Derek Green caught that and shared that, which I think is really very funny. And then finally, one more golden shoe for today. Speaking of enjoying a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, a perfect day, Coco Cay. Cannot wait to be there coming up in a couple of weeks. Our buddy Matt Forchie writes in to say, hey, Dawg Nation Daily, just letting you know that today was a perfect day at Coco Cay. Lots of dogs out on Royal Caribbean's Independence of the Season, Coco Cay. That's awesome to see. And Matt enjoying himself a little nap there, right there at Coco Cay there as well. That is a great thing to see. Matt will give you a golden shoe, too, for your enjoyment there. Perfect day, Coco Cay. Cannot wait to be doing that ourselves here very soon. Great crop of golden shoes to close out our week here. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, our Gator Hater Countdown, 204 days from right now. Georgia in Jacksonville, could be for the last time, maybe, beating up on Florida again. That's going to be fun to watch then. And we hope you have a great weekend now. We'll see you back here Monday for Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. R.S. Andrews will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. So glad to have them as a part of the program. And, of course, busy weekend coming up for me. We probably won't go crazy long with comments today. A lot to do in observance of Good Friday today and then in celebration of Easter the rest of the weekend. So I'll probably pop out of here in just a little bit. But nonetheless, we want to give you your time to talk and share what's on your mind. I'll take some comments. I want to go to Facebook first because I feel like I have not been taking enough care of our Facebook friends as of late, and then we'll visit each of the comment sections. As I said before, probably not going crazy long here today, but nonetheless, getting ready for a great weekend. Matt Rukavina says, just wanted to say, have a great Easter and can't wait till G-Day next week. Matt, me as well. Happy Easter to all of you. I appreciate that. Appreciate that, Matt. Thank you indeed, and appreciate you always being a part of our community here on our program. Somebody also mentioned Setzman. Let me read this. So Barry Watkins says the Bally Sports clip of Bennett throwing out the first pitch wasn't very good because it didn't show whether it was a good throw or not. So I will tell you, I was there. Bennett got a huge ovation, which you love to see. The most important thing, this is a big deal for me. We've talked about this a lot over the years when it comes to these ceremonial first pitches. Bennett stood on the mound. That's 60 feet 6 inches. Stood on the mound, and he threw from the mound. And so that's a big deal because a lot of guys, even athletes, oftentimes will throw in front of the mound, basically shortening the throw. Bennett did throw from the mound. I'll give him credit for that. I think he may have been a touch high, but it wasn't well off the mark. What was weird is I think the guy that was there to catch it like mishandled the catch, and it made the throw seem worse than it was. Bennett may have been a touch high, but he was not well off the mark, and he had plenty to get it there from 60 feet 6 inches. So, and I'll be honest with you. I have, fat fingers. I was trying to fumble with my phone and get my phone open in time to video it myself, and I just messed up. I was going to try to help us post it on social media, but that's why I don't get put in charge of things like this, because I'm just not very adept. So I was going to try to get video of it myself because I had a decent enough view from it to kind of show you what it was, and I just messed around and didn't get my phone ready in time. But I thought it was fine. It was not a perfect strike, may have been a touch high, but it was well thrown from 60 feet 6 inches, and I think it was mishandled. I'm going to score a pass ball on the throw and that ended up making it look a little worse than I think it was. Randy Hall, I don't think I asked Jeff with silence. We got so big into the Raiola and Edric Houston conversation. I believe I got too wrapped up in that. David Faulkner says, great night at Truist Park. Braves never giving up and coming back for the win in the end. Perfect game to honor Stetson Bennett. That's a good point. I didn't think about this. Stetson, the comeback king for Georgia, and a comeback for the Braves last night. It was really kind of amazing. I don't want to turn this into a baseball show, but Atlanta had been playing such a competent brand of baseball all season long. Then you have this eighth-inning disaster where, for 15 minutes, they look like a Little League team. You have a wild pitch that scores a run. My son, he turned to me and said, this looks like our team, and which I thought was kind of a funny thing for him to say. Pass ball, wild pitch scores a run. Next play is the squeeze bunt that just gets ball gets thrown in the middle of the outfield. Kirby Yates just throws the ball into the middle, of right field there on that. Another run comes in. Runner gets all the way around to third. Game could have completely gotten away from me right there. And yet Atlanta just came firing back again. Rosario comes in, pinch hit, gets a double, and then Arcia just amazing year here thus far. Home run and the game-winning hit last night. Brandon Ray says, who do you think takes the huge step this season? To me, for Georgia, one of the easiest answers for that is a name that Jeff Sintel mentioned. Now, this guy's battling injury right now, and so obviously we'll pay attention to this. But I think the next big star for Georgia, because this list has to be short. You can't have a list of 45 names as the next big star at Georgia. If you're looking for the very, very short list of guys who are on their way to being first-round picks, the same way a handful of Georgia guys are this year, certainly were last year, I think Mikael Williams is one of the most important names in that discussion. I think Mikael is on his way to absolute start. Foot injury might be a minor setback on this, but you get a long time to get ready for the upcoming season. I think Mikael is about to be a household name. I really do. Chad Williams pointing out that Spencer Strider had 10 strikeouts. Yeah, I mean, a guy like that can miss bats. That is one of the most important commodities you can have going into a postseason situation. Braves obviously won in excess of 100 games a year ago, came up short in terms of their end-of-season goal. And how do you make the playoffs go differently? A guy like that who has the ability to miss bats. I don't even know that Strider had his best stuff last night. He's a little wild there for a moment. but that is a guy that knows how to miss bats, and that is a big deal. Lucy Bowers Boykin, we're glad you're here. So we got an update on you yesterday, Lucy. It sounds like you're having some your dad's dealing with some issues right now. So Lucy, we love you. We care about you. We're glad you stopped by today. We got prayers going your way. So keep us updated on that, Lucy, and hope you're able to enjoy some Easter here this weekend. But let us know how all that's going, Lucy. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Barry Watkins says he really likes Murphy behind the plate. I'll tell you this: was it the Washington series or was it St. Louis when he had that other night, that throw out down to second? We got the guy out at second. That pop time on that. I mean, you understand why he is valued as such a high level defensive catcher, because that throw down to second the other night was a bullet, absolutely. Now it's interesting the choices they're making in terms of, he's actually sat a couple of times already this season, which was a little bit different than some people may have expected. But obviously, Darnold has had an amazing start offensively, so you got a lot going on with these Atlanta Braves right now. Brandon Griffin on the other side of the ball, I mentioned Mikael Williams. He mentions Arian Smith. He says he's going to be a huge force this year now that he's focusing on football. Consistent speed, deep threat we've been lacking. Yeah, here's one of those guys that, Arian doesn't require a million touches to be very impactful, right? I mean, obviously you'd love to have him get as many touches as he possibly can, but this is a guy, we've been talking about baseball, his home run threat here is, if he swings for the fences a couple times for you per game, all of a sudden that changes everything. It doesn't just change, your own explosive play rate, but it changes the way that other guys get guarded and covered, and that's potentially Arian's value right there. So I think that's important. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Let's see what else. Brooksy looking forward to some fun here at the Masters here this weekend. Let's see what else is going on. So Andrew Sisson says he has heard fans say Falcons. He says, in 1996, I went to the Seahawks versus Falcons game in Fulton County Stadium wearing my Seahawks jersey. Remember, Andrew's from the Pacific Northwest. He told us that earlier. He says, through the whole game, there were a few female Falcons fans screaming in my ear, "Go Falcons." That's a new one on me. That's a new one. Maybe, I said before, Dan Mullen was staying at some place that was Kaylee, do you have the ability to put that back up where Dan Mullen was saying he's staying? Maybe the kind of people who know about these sort of like famous, like fancy tropical locations, maybe they're the kind of people who say Falcons. That sort of seems like sort of fancy. So, first of all, Kaylee, have you ever heard of Grabbers on Guana Cay? Like that, like where is it Abacos? How do you say that? Abacos?
I just heard of New Hampshire like last year, so I'm not the person to ask about this.
There you go. That's good, Kaylee. I like that. So maybe if you know where Guana Cay is, maybe you're the kind of person who says Falcons. Maybe that's the case. I don't know that Royal Caribbean goes to Guana Cay. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm just not aware of that. But there you go. By the way, speaking of the spring transfer portal a year ago, Johnny Surfdog also reminding us that glad that Amarius Mims turned down a starting spot at Florida State in the portal last spring to stay as the backup there at Georgia. That turned out to be a huge, huge deal and paid dividends in last year's national championship season, and it especially pays dividends this year as he becomes one of the most important players in this Georgia team. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks to the internet, I found that Guana Cay is in the Bahamas.
Oh, so Dan Mullen, why can't he just say the Bahamas? Why is he going to say Bacos? There are lots of Bahamian islands. I have not been to all of them. There's, Great Exuma and Grand Bahama, and I guess Freeport's a part of Grand Bahama. So Dan Mullen always had to be more complicated than need be. Why can't he just say that he's in the Bahamas? But yes, I in Ohio Dog letting us know that is it Abacos or Abacos? How do you say it? But it is in the Bahamas. But the point is, go back to the Amarius Mims thing. Mims was a huge, huge deal, preventing him from transferring to Florida State, keeping him, started 2 games in the college football playoff. That's massive in itself. And on that list of, we talked about, Mikael Williams before, a pretty good name on the offensive side on that might be Mims. Mims could be just one of the very best players on the roster and in the entire country here this year, kind of a Broderick Jones level play. That's at least a possibility for Marius Mims this season. That would be massive for Georgia. Senior Dawg 54 says that Sanford Stadium in the fall is great, but as far as a family outing, nothing beats a Braves game. Yeah, so I was thinking about this before the show here today, being there last night. I was a teenager in 1996, so I don't have maybe as much of a memory of the Olympics as some people do, but I believe that what the Olympics were supposed to be in terms of a transformational moment for our city, kind of bringing this in sort of a world-class level, I think what the Olympics were supposed to be, Truist Park and the Battery actually is. I mean, when I was younger, I think some people might have said, Atlanta's not a very good sports town. This is not a great sports town. And who knows, maybe back in the 90s, early 2000s, maybe that was true. Maybe Atlanta did care about other things other than sports. Maybe that's the case. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to go to a Braves game at Truist Park right now in that Battery, Atlanta, in a situation. I know last night was the home opener, so there's a little bit of extra juice there associated with that. But honestly, I was at day games a year ago. They had 40,000 people for day games last year. The point is, hard-pressed to go to a Braves game at Truist right now in that area around the Battery and not come away thinking that Atlanta is one of the most passionate sports towns that exists in America. I think that the creation of that stadium, the creation of that area around the stadium, has just completely transformed, I believe, the way the city's viewed. I think it has kind of brought Atlanta to the forefront of the sporting conversation. And we know a lot of other ballparks have kind of marketed themselves as kind of like their version of what the Battery is. I just think it's amazing. Memphis Dawg wondering if Dan Mullet's making more money not working than Sunbelt Billy is for working. I don't know about that, but I bet when Billy Napier sees this stuff, he's like, gosh, I'm not quite so sure Dan Mullen doesn't have it better than me. He's up there in the Bahamas. I'm down here, begging for somebody into the transfer portal. My guess is that might be one of those things that he kind of wishes was the case. Jonathan Aaron says, I know you don't watch much stuff on YouTube, but check out the Pat McAfee show from yesterday. They had a segment, and they said a lot of good stuff about Washington would be good for the show. Okay, I will check that out. Darnell Washington, I'm assuming you're talking about. I will check that out. And I've actually gotten to where I watch a lot more content on YouTube than I used to. I am not the biggest Pat McAfee viewer, and that's not anything against Pat. I don't have anything against him. That's not really been my cup of tea quite as much. He's a little frantic for me sometimes. But I have gotten to where I watch a lot more content on YouTube. Just one of those things. I guess I've just kind of got a little bit more used to. Spencer Clark says the deck parking at Truist is awful at best. I would say I've gotten a lot more used to it. When it first opened, the parking situation was way different than previous Braves games had been. But I'd say I've just kind of gotten more used to it now, and I've sort of figured out my way of kind of navigating that. Because yesterday we didn't really have much of a problem at all. I'm sort of in the stage of my life where, you walk out of the stadium and you see all the people like pouring into like all the various, like bars and restaurants around the Battery, and they're going to be there for a couple of hours. Like, I'm not really in a stage of my life where I'm doing that. I've got my 11-year-old son. We're coming home. I've got to work the next day, and, he's got to get to bed. So the presence of the Battery, even though I'm not really getting to enjoy a lot of the Battery stuff, the presence of the Battery creates a scenario where it's actually a little easier to get out. When so many people who are in the stadium are now like sort of spilling into the bars, well, now that creates a little bit of an extra lane to get out. Because last night was one of the largest crowds they've ever had for a game. And this is not an ad. This is just me, relaying my own experience. Last night, one of the largest crowds they've had. But, right after the last pitch, we went to the clubhouse door for a minute and hung out there for a second, then walked out and kind of made our way towards our parking garage. And honestly, we got out pretty quick. It was not a huge delay there really at all. And so when I first started going to Truist years ago, it was called something different back then, but when I first started going a couple of years ago, I'd say I had some transportation challenges. It was just kind of trying to figure out a new ballpark. I sort of feel like I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with that here right now.
Did you get a chance to try any of the new concession stand snacks they just added?
No, I don't like novelty food at ballparks. I like traditional food. I want popcorn. I want things like that. I know they have like the world's largest hamburger and stuff like that. Typically speaking, I'm not a big eater of novelty food. Nature Gator, who by the way is really fancy and he's very sophisticated, says the Abacos are famous for sharks. You would think the islands would be a favorite spot for Jim McElwain. Very funny, actually, Nature Gator. That's very funny. He says the Napier makes $7 million a year at Florida. That's more than Mullen made. Nature Gator, very funny on the Jim McElwain joke. Very good on that. Very good. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says, Happy Easter to you and your family, B.A. Appreciate that, Foster. Thank you so much. Kaylee, do you eat novelty ballpark food like that? See, here's the thing. It's like when you take something back to your seat, you got to put it in your lap. I'm not trying to get stuff like that all over my clothes, right? That's the challenge about eating in the ballpark is when there are 40-something thousand people, you got people sitting on both sides of you. You got your food in your lap. It's just getting everywhere.
At the ballpark, I eat everything I can get my hands on.
Okay.
Twice over. I'm a popcorn girl, though, through and through.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what sporting event. The popcorn says it all.
Yeah, you get it in your teeth, but nonetheless, that is the case.
Not if you keep drinking.
There you go. I like that. That's good. That is good advice for Kelly Mansell right there. A good way to take us into the weekend. All right, let me do a couple more comments. We'll get ready to our wrap here in a moment. G. Grace points out something that I think is fair. He says Napier's been at Florida for 1 year. Says the jury is still out on him. Saban and Kirby failed at Alabama and Georgia in their first year. I think generally speaking what G. Grace is saying there is right. Like I am not ready to say, Billy Napier's not going to be a good coach at Florida. I do laugh at the fact that they had a losing season a year ago, and I do think they are set up to have a losing season again as it stands right now because like the one difference is between Napier, Saban, and Kirby is, and G. Grace, you know this, Saban may have had a losing season in 2007, or at least they had they lost at Louisiana Monroe. I forget if it was actually a losing season or not. It wasn't a good year, right? But in 2008, that recruiting class, one of the best recruiting classes that anybody had ever had. It may have been, at that time, measurably the best class ever. So that's an example of, okay, well, Nick Saban may not have been very good on the field, but here's this 2008 recruiting class that was just like electric. And Kirby had his own version of that, too. Now, I would tell you, I believe that Kirby had a better 2016 than Billy Napier had a 2022 in that, Kirby beat a top 10 ranked Auburn team as a 10-point underdog. Kirby put a number 3 recruiting class together in 2017, which was 24/7 Sports was like a plus 300 class. So that was a very big class for Georgia at the time. So there was plenty of evidence that things were heading in the right direction for Georgia, even though Georgia was only 8-5 in 2016. I would say at Florida right now, objectively speaking, you don't have that same level of evidence. They got a good quarterback commit for the 2024 class in Lagway, but they are absent the kind of tangible proof that would say they're heading in the right direction. You say, well, they beat Utah a year ago. They did. I don't know that in the SEC you get credit for beating a Pac-12 team. Georgia didn't get credit for beating Oregon. Florida doesn't get credit for beating Utah. You just don't get credit for beating a Pac-12 team if you're in the SEC. So Napier's got to show more at the beginning of his SEC tenure to kind of even get the benefit of the doubt the way that other guys did. By the way, year 2, typically speaking, is a big leap forward. For coaches who have any level of success whatsoever, year 2 is typically a big leap forward. Kirby won the SEC in his second year. Nick Saban won the West in his second year. Mark Richt won the SEC in his second year. Urban Meyer, what did he do? Was his first year 2005, second year 2006, he won the national championship, if I'm remembering correct. Second years are typically really big for a lot of these coaches. So this is not being funny or Gator hate or anything like that, is that typically speaking, historically, making a big move in your second year is very, very important for demonstrating what you have a capability of being. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on here. Sounds like let's go Brandon block G. Grace. Let's go unblock G. Grace. That's funny. I love the Army Dog Charlie asking about the Georgia-Florida game staying in Jacksonville. So I don't have any new news on that. Charlie, what we do expect to see is the SEC to make an official announcement about its schedule in May. when they have the spring meetings in Destin, I believe we'll hear official announcements then on the expansion to a 9-game conference schedule. They may identify the 3 permanent opponents. They may just reveal all of that. And there is a chance around that time you could hear something on Georgia, Florida as well. What we do know is that the contract for the Georgia-Florida game, I think, officially ends after this year's game. There are some option years that could be picked up if the schools want to pick them up. But last year, prior to the Georgia-Florida game, there was this very weird cryptic message that came out. It was Georgia and Florida, basically a joint message from the two that were acknowledging that they were going to consider all options moving forward, which was, I believe, a little bit of a, an indication of Jacksonville, if you want to keep this game, you better pony up an exorbitant amount of money in order to be able to do it. Well, the truth is Jacksonville just may not be able to afford to do that. That, as important as that game is to the local economy, they may not be able to make the kind of guarantee that would be necessary to even have a chance of keeping a game like this. Florida historically has obviously been in favor of the game staying in Jacksonville, but it seemed like last year their situation had changed. We know Kirby Smart wants to change it. So all of this sort of adds up to circumstantial evidence. The reason why people think the game is about to leave Jacksonville is because of all I just said. The fact that the two schools released the statement last year, contract ends, just so happens it ends the same year. The SEC is making another major schedule change. All of it seems to fall into place. Now, Texas, Oklahoma, my guess is they continue to play at the State Fair in Texas, I think anyway. But Georgia, Florida is, I would guess, coming to an end. The other big neutral site game that's taking place every year between Arkansas and Texas A&M, I believe that's also going to stop being a neutral site game there as well. All right, final comments. We've got to get ready to go. Blind Squirrel Sports says he always gets a stadium burger when he goes to games, but he says, but it ain't like it used to be. In my youthful days, ballpark food tasted terrible, but you were also hungry. It's a blessing to have nowadays. Yeah, the ballpark experience has changed. Now, at the Battery, what we typically do is we go to one of the restaurants prior to the game. You get really a good meal there. So I'm not as hungry during the games as I used to be because you get that nice meal prior to that. And there's obviously a lot of food choices there on that. I also told y'all a couple of weeks ago, I don't eat hot dogs anymore. So I like the brats, the smoked sausage, things like that. But like a regular hot dog, I don't eat that. And I certainly don't eat a foot-long hot dog. That just brings up too many concerns about what's actually inside that thing. All right. Jonathan Aaron says, with all that Jags and AEW money, they're going to pay up. So it was funny, Jonathan, after the 2020 Georgia-Florida game, this is the pandemic game, after the 2020 Georgia-Florida game, when I was leaving the stadium, AEW was having like a pay-per-view or something. Because there's the there's this like kind of open-air arena connected to the stadium, which AEW uses a lot. And so that day there was this there was an AEW pay-per-view taking place, and Tony Schiavone, who does the AEW stuff, had done a lot of stuff with Georgia, and so a lot of the Georgia guys knew Tony pretty well. And so Tony had gotten some of the people affiliated with Georgia tickets. A lot of people were leaving the Georgia-Florida game to go to this AEW pay-per-view event, and one of the guys that I know will try to get me to come with him, and I was, Georgia just lost to Florida. I wasn't in any kind of mood to go watch wrestling, so I went home. But it was weird that year because it's obviously a pandemic. The stadium was basically empty. But after the game, there was an AEW pay-per-view taking place, in that little, I forget what that place is called. Daily Place, is that what it's called? Daily Place, right next to the stadium. And this is back when you couldn't really get many people in for a wrestling event either. You had to have very limited crowd stuff. But I didn't feel like going because Georgia just lost. Let's go ask a really good question. He says, do you think the fans will still bring the same level of world's largest outdoor cocktail party atmosphere to the respective schools each year once it goes home and home? I think it's a very legitimate question. It scares me to think, but I think it is at least a possibility that if you move Georgia, Florida home and home, it may technically still be Georgia's biggest rival, but I think a lot of the game could begin to feel a good bit different because we see this happen with Georgia Auburn. Georgia-Auburn's a huge rivalry to so many people, but if Auburn's not very good, all of a sudden the rivalry doesn't feel quite as big. It scares me to think that, you put Georgia-Florida into a home-and-home situation within a few years, maybe that just sort of feels like just another game, depending on how good Florida might be in that particular year. All right, last comments. Thomas Dew says, how good is C.J. Allen going to be as Georgia's starting linebacker this season? That's quite a shot being called out by Thomas. I do believe that C.J. Allen has a very, very bright future. And we asked Jeff a moment ago about some of those freshmen that you're most excited about seeing on G-Day, and C.J. Allen is one of the names that he mentioned. So, on the field and being a contributor, I would say that's probably there's a chance that's probably true. James Davis going to see the Hawks and 76ers tonight. There you go. James, hope you enjoy that. So I guess Philadelphia's kind of locked up their playoff situation right now, so I wonder if Embiid is going to play. Maybe you already know that. I don't know. But obviously Embiid's trying to put together an MVP-type season. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says, Ric Flair says, if you're a real man, you cry about hard times. That's very funny. By the way, Hard Times, Dusty Rhodes promo, the best wrestling promo of all time. Even to this day, still the very best wrestling promo. Every now and then I'll just go on YouTube and watch. Like I told you before, I just watch more YouTube than I used to. That's kind of the stuff that I'll just go watch. I'll just go watch Dusty Rhodes Hard Times and stuff like that. Ken Holcomb talking about the huge change around that Truist Park area. It's huge for sure. Miriam Corbin says, my husband and son used to bowl in a father-son league with Tony Schiavone and his son. Nice guy. Yeah, Tony's son's a great guy, too. I don't know Tony super well, but I know his son very well, for sure. Brandon Griffin said, Mama said Gators are angry because they've got them teeth and no toothbrush. That's really funny, Brandon. Really funny. What else are we going to do? Miriam Corbin, thank you for the kind words as well. Appreciate that. All right. Let me go back to DawgNation.com. I'll wrap up for today. West GA Dog fan shouting out Kaylee, saying you've done a great job, and thank you for the rest of Dog Nation for what you do. West GA Dog fan, we appreciate you shouting out Kaylee. Appreciate that for sure. Johnny Surf Dog says, by the way, he's a Jacksonville guy, and even he thinks it's about time to move the game. So it seems like that's where the momentum may be going here right now. By the way, Randy also wants to give Kaylee some premier novelty food. There you go, some chef-inspired food from Marlowe's he's talking about, which is funny. Ohio Dog, happy Easter right back to you there as well. Hope you all enjoy it. Hope we get a chance to get some golf in this weekend too. Braves as well, trying to keep their series against the San Diego Padres. I'd say, based on my understanding of the forecast, next two Braves games could be pretty heavily threatened. Now, I'm not a meteorologist. This is why we bring on people like Ella Dorsey on the show, because I am not a meteorologist. But it sounds like next two Braves games could be pretty impacted. And I guess you got to start thinking about the possibility of a Monday finish for the Masters, I guess. It's been a long time since we've had a Monday finish. I believe it's early 80s, I think. So it's been a long time since they've done that, and obviously that is not their preference. But my fear is we could have some bad weather this weekend. Bad weather indeed. So hopefully that's not the case, and hopefully we'll get the Easter egg hunts in and everything else. So we'll observe Good Friday today. We'll celebrate Easter throughout the weekend, and we just appreciate you being here. Y'all check out the AJC, by the way, as weather does kind of move you through the weekend. AJC will have plenty of coverage for you on that. Also, the Sights and Sounds from Augusta. One of the things I always love, great photographs coming out of that. Terrific imagery of what's going on there in Augusta. You can see all that online, ajc.com there as well. And also Orlando Arcia. We told you about the heroic performance from him last night. You can read more about that online, ajc.com there as well. And really cool Easter-themed events around the Atlanta area this weekend, too. So all of that online, ajc.com. Make sure you check that out. And our friends at RS Andrews, by the way, find them online rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the prices promised, including that air conditioning unit, getting it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. I think it's going to be kind of cold this weekend, but you're talking about, warm weather after that. You want some good AC to keep you cool and comfortable. Our friends at RS Andrews can help you with it online at rsandrews.com. All right, I'm going to go home. I'm going to have a weekend here, and I'll see you back here Monday. G-Day week. Be ready for it. 9:45, 1st and 15. That's Monday. Dawg Nation Daily presented by Kroger after that. We'll talk to you then, everybody.